Welcome to NYLA 2020 On Demand. This session was previously recorded for the NYLA 2020 virtual conference. It is available to you through December 31st, 2020. Please note, once viewed, each on-demand program is eligible for 1 continuing education credit. Links to materials and presenter contact information have been archived in a Google folder and are made available after conference. Support files and documents can be found in session files below the program description. Any questions about the NYLA 2020 virtual conference digital platform can be directed to Christina@nyla.org, or you can call 800-252-6952. Classify Nonfiction with the Dewey Hybrid Model is sponsored by PLS and co-sponsored by CISL, SMART, and YSS. Without further ado, our presenter.
Hello, I am Haley Sutherland Zancanato, and I'm here to talk to you today about classifying nonfiction with the Dewey Hybrid Model. Let me give you a quick background about myself, and then we'll get started. I went to Mount Holyoke College for my bachelor's in English, and then I went and got my library degree at Rutgers with a concentration in digital libraries. And then after that, I went to the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth for a PhD in educational leadership and policy. But it was a really cool program, and they let me actually focus on libraries. So I kind of got to delve into the Library of Congress subject headings and a little bit about this program that we're going to go over today. So during that time, I started as an English teacher in a high school, and then I became a school librarian. And I've been doing that for about 11 years now. And over the course of that time, I've also worked as a public reference librarian for a couple years as, kind of a side job. So I've seen the school side and the public library side. And I bring that up because I have a feeling that I'm speaking mainly to school librarians and public librarians today. And I know that the biggest hurdle for when people think about, do I want to break away from Dewey and change up my classification system is, well, if we do that in a school model, well, how are kids going to grow up and learn how to use the public library, because that uses the Dewey Decimal Classification. And I would argue that, and I say this about my students, is if they don't feel welcome in the library and they don't love coming to the library now and they feel comfortable, they're not going to want to use the public library when they grow up. And so getting them to feel comfortable and confident in searching for books and browsing for books can make a huge difference. And then from the public library side, we've seen lots of public library systems that have actually changed over to a Dewey-Free model or some version of that. And so we'll get to that too. Okay, so here's what we're going to go over today. A brief history of classification, very brief because that's a big topic. Dewey, the pros and cons for better or worse. The origins of dropping Dewey and how schools and public libraries have started that. Middle ground, so finding that place of maybe not Dewey-free, maybe a hybrid model. And then how to go about that. That's the bulk of this. Once you decide, okay, I want to make some changes, well, how do you do it? And how long is it going to take? And how many materials do you need to do that? And then some recommended shifts in classification. So maybe you're not ready to change your entire nonfiction collection, but maybe you want to make some shifts. And so we'll go over, where to start or what you can do. And then project outcomes, because I have done this before. And so I'll share what worked really well, what some of the outcomes were, and what happened. Okay, so a brief history of classification. So way back when, right, the early Library of Congress collections were arranged by size and then order of acquisition. So this was, of course, fixed location where the book went on the shelf, and that's where it belonged, and it always went back to that spot. Now, historically, stacks were only accessible by librarians. So we didn't really have patrons searching any kind of a catalog and then going to the stacks and picking out their own books. So when these early systems were created, they were created for librarians, for the professionals, not for the patrons to use. So that kind of added to that layer of how complicated is it, and is it for just any person versus a professional. In 1898, that year, there were fewer than 1,000 or 8,000 titles added to the Library of Congress collection, but then from 1901 onward, the number of titles increased substantially. So that's where we saw much more publication, and now with so many more titles being added to libraries, there was a huge need for a better system of keeping things organized. So we ended up with relative shelving. We ended up with the Dewey Decimal System. And there are, of course, are other systems, right? So Library of Congress classification, Dewey Decimal, but also Cutter's expansive classification. And so there's some fun history behind that, and how when the Library of Congress classification was developed, they considered adapting Dewey's system for theirs, but he said, no, you can't really make major changes to it. But Cutter said, well, you can adapt mine. And so Library of Congress has taken a lot of the origins of Cutter into creating that. So we now have these different systems, and they were created a long time ago by people who may have their own biases. And so maybe there are some ways that we could change it up to make it more accessible for our patrons today. We have made some shifts that libraries use all the time now, right? So reference has been pulled out and is its own separate section, its own space in the library, even though it runs 000 to 999. Biography has been pulled out, so we have a separate prefix for that, and fiction as well. So we have made changes. So Dewey, for better or worse, what's so great and what's so terrible? Dewey is based on a numeric system. So the inherent benefit in that is that there's no language barrier, right? So if someone's native language is not English, that's okay. They're looking for numbers, not words. So that's a benefit. It's also a standard unified system. Over this many years, it's now been incorporated into libraries in over 135 countries. So no matter where you go, you basically know how to use it. You can then therefore do copy cataloging. It allows for relative shelving locations, and it's expandable. So that means, you know, when Dewey created it, we didn't really have anything like computers or the internet or anything like that, but we've made room in the Dewey Decimal System for those new categories. So those are the benefits. The drawbacks, though, are that it's a biased system in many ways, and language is power. So when we have things like other and comparative religions in the 290s, and then other languages in the 490s, and general history of other areas in the 990s, it makes you wonder how people feel if their heritage or their religion or the language they speak is other as opposed to something that's named. So that's a concern, that there are certain things that aren't named and some things that are named, and who chose that. Also, of course, religion is made up of 90% Christianity, which doesn't really mirror the world today. So some other challenges are that topics have become fragmented over the years. One thing that kind of personally bothers me is I find the 150s to contain some really inspirational works and motivational things. And to me, that would be more along the lines of some spirituality and should be blended with religion, but they're very separate. Crocheting and knitting in the 746s is split from sewing in the 646s. So somebody who really loves to crochet and knit and likes crafts is not going to just stumble across sewing unless they walk many aisles in the stacks for some public libraries, because those aren't very close. Another challenge, this is something that I see in the high school, is that some of our 10th graders do what we call a drug project, where they have to go research some kind of drug. Well, you can't just send them to the stacks and say, browse this section, because it's split across the 300s and the 600s. And we run into this with a fair number of topics. So topics have become split over the years. Another challenge is that it's really intimidating for infrequent nonfiction browsers and searchers. So people come to the library, and especially a public library, and their first stop is the reference desk or sometimes the circulation desk, because they're asking for help and they don't know where to find what they're looking for. And that's really wonderful. We really love that as librarians, that, you know, people ask for help. But we also want to hope that people are able to just browse and search for whatever they're looking for. And I'll go back to this in a little bit, but one thing to consider is if every time you walked into Target, you had to stop at, you know, the customer service desk and ask for help, how annoying would that be? So it should be intuitive enough that you can kind of find what you're looking for, unless it's something really specific. And also, it still requires searching for topics, even for us. and this happens all the time. I have, a student come in and say, I'm looking for such and such, and I take 3 steps toward the stacks, and then I realize I don't quite know what the number is, and so I have to go back to the computer and sit down and search it because, I might be off by a couple columns, and then we're going to be there forever. So changing the system to something like a Dewey Hybrid Model makes it a lot easier for the staff as well. So here's what has happened with the origins of dropping Dewey. In the 21st century library, we have to question, where is the focus? Are we so focused on teaching patrons how to find materials and getting them to learn a system such as Dewey Decimal System, or even Library of Congress when they go to college? Is that really the focus, that we want them to know this system? Or do we really only want to focus more on, are they finding what they're looking for? Are they actually getting matched up with the materials that they were seeking? Are their information needs being met? And so I think the thing to think about is, when we say, I don't know about getting rid of Dewey, I mean that all they have to do is just learn the system, or just, search in the card catalog or read the signs. I think it's not so much about making signage better or changing up signage or creating more finding guides. Maybe it's time to overhaul how we think about what the library is used for, and if the focus should be on finding or using those materials. So here's the analogy, right? So we've got a big box store and a hardware store. So if you think about like Walmart, Target, even the grocery store, but I'm going to use Home Depot in this case. Now, some people are really great with places like Home Depot, and they just kind of know where everything is. That's their thing, and it's intuitive to them. Lots of people, though, of course, don't really know how to find things in Home Depot. They don't really know what they're looking for. They have a problem, like an information need, right? Something broke, and now they have to go fix it, but they really don't know how to, and maybe they found a YouTube video, but they don't really know where the parts are, and so they stumble in the door of Home Depot, and it's very overwhelming. So I went to their website and pulled off some of the main categories. So when you go to the website and it says departments. And so I listed them out here. So we've got all kinds of things here. And if I was, going to go to the store, and these were going to be the signs above the sections of the aisles, and I walk in and I think, well, I want to get a new chandelier for the dining room. So I look through these different categories and I think, well, chandeliers are kind of electrical, right? And then I keep searching and I think, okay, oh wait, there's a lighting section. That's a closer match. So I walk to the lighting section, right? Here are the lighting department subcategories. And this is right from the Home Depot website. So they have chandeliers listed. And if I happen to be looking for a ceiling fan, that would be listed too. So they've made it really easy to kind of find what you're looking for. But the thing that I really think is important to think about is that you don't have to walk in and go to the help desk and wait in line, because we all know how long that can take, to simply ask, where do I find this? It's one thing if it's something very specific, but it's another thing if it's a really general item or a huge section, and you could find it on your own with some really great signs. The alternative, right, is what if you walk in Home Depot and they have everything in numbers? Above every aisle is some kind of number code, and there's no signs that say lighting, no signs that say appliances. And you kind of have to wander the whole store because all you see are number codes and you don't really know how that works. So that might be how our patrons are reacting to libraries when they come in, if it's been a really long time since they've used the Dewey Decimal System, or if they don't really know, like, okay, I got to find a kiosk to search. Where do I find that? So that's kind of the comparison to walking into a library today versus walking into Home Depot. What I will mention now, though, is looking at this list right here, these subcategories. Imagine if Home Depot decided that they were going to organize their lighting department by manufacturer. This is a good analogy for when libraries say, we're done with Dewey, we're going Dewey-Free, and Dewey-Free puts things in categories, but then breaks it down by author's last name. And that has a lot of challenges too, because that would be the same thing as if Home Depot said, well, we're going to organize all of the lighting area by manufacturer. So you need to look through commercial electric, generation lighting, Hampton Bay, home decorators collection, and each of those is going to have some cabinet lights, some ceiling fans, some chandeliers, some commercial lighting. And that's the impact of that fragmentation that happens if you go totally Dewey-free. So that is why I don't really recommend Dewey-free, and we'll get to that. So this is the difference, right? Intuitive plain language categories where you can consult a directory if you need to, but you don't have to. And then a numerical code, which would be like the Dewey Decimal System, where you have to look stuff up because otherwise you're not going to find it otherwise. Okay, so this is where it kind of all started. Back in October 2012, this issue of School Library Journal came out and crossed my desk. And that's when I read the article and kind of thought, I wonder what would happen. I wonder if we could do something like that. So we ended up with a middle ground model. This happened at Dartmouth High School in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, where I was the librarian there, and we had one full-time TA that worked in the library with me, and she got on board too and thought, wow, that would really change everything. So the model we came up with is not the same as Dewey-Free. Like I said, Dewey-Free breaks it out into categories, but then files by author's last name, which actually is similar to what you see in places like Barnes & Noble, which for librarians is very frustrating to navigate, I will just say. Dewey Hybrid breaks it out into categories and subcategories, but then files by Dewey number and the full original call number. So Dewey number followed by author's last name, okay? So now, here's an example of what happens when you do this. These screenshots were taken from the catalog at Dartmouth High School, which still maintains a Dewey Hybrid Model 7 years later. And I've been gone for like 5 years, essentially. So the call number of these books, these are 2 books about drugs, and they were originally split. One was in the 300s, one was in the 600s, and we merged them essentially because they both ended up in the main category of health and the subcategory of drugs. And then they are filed by Dewey number within that drug category. So when I send kids over to the stacks to say, okay, you're here for your drug project and you need to go look up whatever, you know, class of drugs you're studying, they are all in that one section of, say, maybe, you know, 1, 2, 3 shelves worth of Similarly, here is what happens when you look at something like the category of, we had diseases and illnesses. So under the category of health, we had a subcategory for diseases and illnesses. Now the top 2, you'll notice it says Family Guide to Asthma and Allergies, and the second one is Coping with Asthma. They are organized by Dewey number. So they would come basically one after the other, 616.2 FAM, 616.2 SIM. And after that, still within the diseases and illnesses category, you would end up with something like 616.85 MOR, which is about depression. So that's really important because if you went totally Dewey-free and you were just going to go by the author's last name, that would swap those and you would end up with the book about depression in the middle of the asthma books, and it would be all over the place for all different conditions or diseases or things like that. So by maintaining the Dewey number, you are maintaining the gradations within each category, and that's really important for browsing. Here are some of the places that have made the jump. I mean, this was just a basic search. There's lots of places. So there's public libraries, high schools, and most of these I would say are Dewey-free. I haven't really seen anybody else do a Dewey hybrid model like we did, but ours is at the bottom and there's the link. So let's talk about the conversion process. So how do you go about, let's say you decide, okay, this sounds like a great idea. Let's do it, but how do we get started and what's needed? So step one, of course, is research and discuss and get approval as needed. So, you know, that might be your board of directors, that might be your principal. And I do recommend you select an approach here. Are you going for like the permission model or the forgiveness model? Because it depends on, you know, clearly if this is a public library, this is a huge shift, huge undertaking. There's no way somebody's not going to notice. So that's definitely something where you have to get permission ahead of time and get approval and design a plan and all of that stuff. If you're in a school, especially a smaller school, I honestly would argue that you're on a forgiveness model, because do you really need to consult your principal or your superintendent to determine where you're going to put books on the shelf? And that sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's true that, you know, you're not talking to other librarians and other like library systems. You're talking about your one building, and it really isn't, I don't think, something that they would have the insight to know how important or valuable this could be. You're not asking to get rid of books. You're not, which, you know, weeding can be a challenge in public schools because it's taxpayer dollars, and then people get very concerned about that. So you're not trying to get rid of books here. You're also not trying to add to the budget substantially by buying new books. You're simply rearranging the books that you have. And so if you think you're going to get a ton of pushback from administration, I would consider starting small and just making some shifts and not trying to get this, you know, some huge presentation approved ahead of time. So then before you start, I would locate some basic collection statistics. And I will say that this is definitely something that we did wrong when we started, because this was, you know, we found the magazine article, we did a little bit of online research, we thought, what a great idea, let's do it. And we got started. And it was a lot of start, stop, trying to figure out what we're doing, because we didn't have a model to go on. And so we didn't take the time to take a baseline, you know, data collection of what do we have, what are our patron, our student perceptions, take a baseline survey so that you could compare that when you're all done. And so that's one of the challenges, is I can't look back and say, here's exactly quantifiably how patron perception has changed of browsing. So I definitely recommend you do that before you get started. So create an action plan and initial timeline. Are you converting the entire nonfiction collection, or are you just converting sections? Are you going to weed prior to converting to a Dewey hybrid model? More about that in a second. So create a process for collecting initial data, you know, a patron survey, usage statistics, and then plan how you're going to go about and execute that survey and data collection so that you're ready to go. Then you need to draft out your categories. So you're going to map out the skeletal categories and subcategories. And then that requires research and compromise, because maybe you're working with a group of librarians and, you know, it's a matter of, are we going to use that word versus this word? Is this a better reflection of what our collection looks like? Should we use this category or that category? I have lots of examples of what I've done over the years, the original set of categories that will be shared as a handout along with this presentation. And then I've got, you know, updated ones that I've edited over the years and thought, you know, oh, I think I would actually change that if I did this again. And there's different versions too. There's, you could look into Metis or the IBISAC, you know, the book one that the book industry does. So you can find these categories and then look at all of them and decide that's a better reflection of what our patrons are interested in, or what our library has a lot of. Then you should also consider color-coded label protectors. We'll discuss those later. And the limited number of colors available. So if you're buying from Demco, for example, which is what we did, there was a certain number of colors available, like I think it was 10. So if you had more top level categories than number of colors, you're going to run into a problem. So that's something to think about ahead of time, just so you're aware of that. Okay, so here's an example of the color coding that we had. I want to say these were 2 by 3 inch, but they worked really great, and the color coding was really important. Here's an example of the labels that we used, and this was, you know, just the, I don't know, Avery or whatever brand that you print. This was we're going to talk about this in a second, but you know, buying genre labels is not going to work so well for this project. It's one thing to genreify your fiction and buy like the romance label and the sci-fi label, and it's color coded and it's got a cute little design on it, and that's great. But for this, with words, it works much better to create your own. And so I'll have templates for that, and how to align that and get started. So this is what we used. For example, this one on the side says social studies. That's the top level category that was in bold. The second level category was biography, and within that we had law and order. Okay. All right, so this is what it kind of looked like on some of the books. So the ones over on the side say social studies, genocides, Holocaust. So, and they had a yellow color-coded label over them because all of our social studies books were in yellow. So if you're a public library, you might have like a history section, and all of your history would be a certain color. And you can see our sports were green. So all of our sports books had a green label on them. So that was really, that's very, very helpful for locating and browsing. It's also very, very helpful for mis-shelving and making sure you don't mis-shelve in the wrong section. Okay, so it's important to investigate the capabilities and limits of your OPAC before you genreify your nonfiction. So are you going to assign a sublocation? Some, it depends on what your software is. I've used a couple over the years, but some of them offer like sublocation dropdowns. Some of them you can edit the call number directly, and you would add a prefix in front of the Dewey number. The important thing is you're not deleting the Dewey number, you're adding information in front of it. So you might want to reach out to your OPAC support and find out if, you know, maybe they've already done this with some librarians and they can tell you, but you're really looking for your maximums, because I've discovered that your call number field can have like a max character length. And so the categories you decide on, you want to kind of map that out, like what is going to go in the OPAC to designate that, and do we have enough character space? Okay, so you're going to test out some call numbers. So you can use this for books you have. If you think that's going to be a problem, you can maybe add some dummy test books in your system to assign these new categories and subcategories, and you want to see what it's going to look like. So, you know, from the patron end and from the admin end, when you search, what are you going to see? Are the call numbers going to look correct? Sometimes if you say, if you use a sublocation dropdown for your top level category, and then you edit the call number directly for your second and third level. So you might say you've got, let me grab an example. So if you had the category of health, and then you had the subcategory of psychology, and you chose health for your dropdown from your sublocation, and then you edited the call number and put the word psychology in front of the Dewey call number, do those show up together when somebody does a search? Or is like the sublocation kind of located over way on the side and then it just says psychology? Because if it just says psychology, your patrons are going to think, all right, I'm looking for the psychology section, and they don't realize they need to go to the health major section and then look for psychology. So you need to test that out first, and that's really important. And then also what happens when you print a shelf list? Are they going to print in order for inventory purposes? Okay. All right, so choosing a labeling process. We talked about this a little bit here. You know, these are the labels we use. I definitely recommend customizable because it's a lot cheaper. You just print your own. If you make a mistake or if you change your mind, or, oh no, we're going to change that word, it's okay. You can just change it up and print them. So choosing where to place the category and subcategory label. You can look at those pictures and see how we did it, but here's my recommendation. You would place it on the spine directly above the call number label, and do not cover up the Dewey call number because that's part of your new call number. You're going to, when you begin this process, you're going to cover the label with clear tape. So we're looking for something super cheap, probably not book tape, but like packing tape, like the dollar store packing tape, because every time you put a label with words on the book, you need to cover it with tape, because it's going to be a while before you get to the color coding process with the label protector. That's probably months down the road. So the words will be vertical. I don't think it's going to look very good if you wrap it around horizontally. So they should be vertical. I know ours go opposite the title, which kind of it took a while to get used to, but it made a lot of sense because of the lining the lines up, the top line, second line, third line. So you can try that out, see how it looks. But I would definitely recommend that, I think I've got it on the next slide, that if the book is too skinny, you want to aim to have the main category visible. So you can see kind of like I think the fourth one from the left, it says 940.53 LEI. That one, you can see the book was too small, too skinny for all the words to fit on the spine. But we made sure that when you're looking at it on the left, social studies showed up first there. And that's important because when you're reshelving, it's a lot easier to see the first thing first to make sure everything's in line correctly. So I would recommend alignment like that. Okay, so if you've decided to weed before you really begin, obviously follow however you do your weeding, your approach and policies. You can even go a little bit easier. You don't need to weed aggressively necessarily, but you would maybe, if you decide you're going to start with 500s, you could weed the 500s and then begin your Dewey Hybrid. If you have a library where you are out of shelf space and you're kind of maxed out, I do recommend weeding at least a small percentage, because when you're said and done with changing things over to Dewey Hybrid, you need more like lag space on the shelves because there are more categories and subcategories. And so it's going to end up in a situation where you need more blank space to section everything out. Okay. So it's time to begin. You're going to choose a Dewey range and begin. There are some great places to start and some not so great places to start. I would start with any of these, the 100s, 200s, 500s, or 800s. And the reason for that is that for the most part, those are more cut and dry than the other ones. Definitely, I would say 500s has been my favorite place to begin because it's almost a one-for-one clear shot with science and math. Those are very, very clear translations into Dewey Hybrid. The ones that get very murky are the 300s, right? And the 600s and 700s. So I would go with something like the 500s to begin, because you want to kind of get a pace going. You want to feel confident, and you don't want to be making, hair splitting decisions on where to put a book. So you're going to review your Dewey Hybrid categories and subcategories that closely match that Dewey range. And then you're going to decide on, okay, these are the ones I'm going to use. So for example, if you choose to start with math, science, and technology, which, if like your science category, whatever you decide for your main heading for like math and science, you would then choose 4 or 5 subcategories to focus on because you need to print the labels. So you're going to print off maybe 2 or 3 sheets to get started of astronomy, chemistry, math, physics, all those, because you can go through and whatever is very obvious, you can go ahead and label those and then you put your tape over them. So you're going to print the labels for those subcategories. You don't want to print like all the subcategories for the entire Dewey Hybrid system before you even begin. You want to just do a couple at a time because you might amend as you go. So gather your things, labels, tape, book cart, printed list of the categories, and go to the stacks and you're going to begin labeling. This is a tedious process. You got to take each book off the shelf. You're going to look at it. Now, if it's science and it literally says physics, then you can just put a physics label on it if that's one of your subcategories. But some of them are not so easy, right? And so you have to consider the title, kind of browse the back of the book, maybe look at the Library of Congress subject headings, and then decide on an appropriate label. But initially, the goal is to cover a lot of ground. So you don't want to, if it's taking you more than 5 to 10 seconds to know what category a book should be in, you should just leave it on the shelf and move on, or choose a different section that's more obvious. You want to cover a lot of ground initially. So you could, if you felt that it was helpful to you, bring your laptop with a barcode scanner to the stacks and scan and open the record in your OPAC. And the reason for this is if you have an OPAC system where it's going to list the subject headings and list information about the book, where you know that if you just kind of quickly scan that, you're going to know what the book is about. And, you know, you can, this might show up more if you were genreifying your fiction and you scan the book and you get things, you know, that say like dystopian literature. And you're like, okay, well, there it is. It's dystopian literature. So that's an option if you feel like that's helpful to you. So over time, you're going to continue to reevaluate your subcategories. So after you finish each Dewey range, like say you do the 500s, then you go back and you consider the books that you discover don't neatly fit into a subcategory. So if there's lots of books where they're just not fitting, maybe you need a new subcategory for them. But if there's really only one or two or a handful, maybe those are just ones that are going to have to be best fit into other subcategories. Also, I just want to mention, I know this is a lot of text on slides, which violates all of the cardinal rules of presentations, but I did this on purpose because if you go back to this slideshow, which will be included as well, I wanted all the instructions to kind of be laid out and not just random phrases that you have to wonder, well, what did she say about that? So that's why it's all laid out here. So you're going to consider subcategories that you thought you needed, but you didn't actually have books for. This is something to think about where if you, goes back to that thing about literary warrant versus like a hierarchy of knowledge. And that's how catalogs were created in the first place. Like, do we create a section for every topic about everything in the world, or do we only create sections for the books that we need them for? Now, over time, we've reached the point where we basically need topics for every type of thing in the world because we have books about every topic, right? But you might discover that you really don't have a lot about a certain thing, or you have a ton about a certain topic and you need to fragment it more and create more gradations there. That's really a library by library thing. So you're going to continue this process. It could take a lot of time, I'm not going to lie to you, but this is the bulk of it, right? So it's making those decisions about what best fits the aboutness of this book. What label would I put on this? The goal is to have your nonfiction collection remain on the shelves, available for checkout and reshelving, while you apply the genre labels, or your category labels above the call number. So you're not moving things all around. The shelves are not off limits to patrons. You're just one by one going in, checking the books and labeling them and then leaving them there, okay? And it's very obvious what you haven't done because it doesn't have a label on it. So you don't have to worry about like, will I know if I already did this book? If it doesn't have a label, you still need to do it. So now, this is all about one-stop shopping. We're going to get into more of the nuanced things of changing over your collection. I'm a huge proponent of interfiling materials because of the experiences I've had with students not discovering information that we had and resources that we had. So for example, they would come in to do a project on the Holocaust. They would either stumble into the reference section and think that because they're seeing books in the 900s that they found the nonfiction section, and then all they come up with are the encyclopedias. Or they would end up in nonfiction and not realize that we had really amazing encyclopedias all about the Holocaust, and or they wouldn't realize that we had DVD documentaries all about interviews with Holocaust survivors that would be really great, firsthand information to incorporate. So I'm a big proponent of putting them all in one section. So it's kind of like the whole, going to Home Depot and you go to the lighting section and they fragment it out by who manufactured it. Like, you don't really care who manufactured it. You just want all the chandeliers in one place and all the, light fixtures in the switches in one place. So a student comes in and they want to research the Holocaust. It doesn't matter if it's a DVD or an encyclopedia. If it's about the Holocaust, it should be all together on the shelf. Same thing with, something like books, documentary DVDs, and reference books about nutrition. You might also find things like your workout DVDs. You would want those in the health section as well. So interfiling is really important as much as possible. Now, I know that especially when we're speaking about public libraries, they have very strong feelings about reference materials circulating. And I know that this can be an uphill battle. And I totally get it that you do not want to have your, World Book 2020 letter T disappear. I did have this happen once. It wasn't 2020. But I mean, how useful is the encyclopedia if you're missing an entire volume of it? So I get it that certain things you don't want to circulate, but there are certain like very specific subject type reference books that could be interfiled with the appropriate subject. So like, you know, you might have a whole reference set on ecosystems, and that could be in your science section in the appropriate subcategory if you were willing to loan it out. And that's something to discuss, and maybe looking at your, if you have a way of checking your in-house circulation, where if you know if people are referring to books and using your reference materials, how often are they doing that? All right, so if that ecosystem set was on the shelf, has anybody touched it? Is anybody using it at all? If they are, and if it's working in reference, then great. But if nobody's even going there and they don't even know it exists, I would argue it serves a better place being able to be circulated and in the nonfiction collection. So you would label your reference books with the same category, subcategory labels that you used for nonfiction. And that's if you're switching them over to be incorporated into circulating materials. And then you would place the new label over your REF line on your spine label. So it would just have what it would look exactly like a nonfiction book. You're covering up REF. Okay, so here's how this compares to traditional Dewey, right? So you would have a separate reference section in the library spanning 000 to 999 if it was traditional. And with Dewey Hybrid, you would have the reference label removed. It would follow the same protocol, but you might still keep, the last bullet point explains, you might still keep your general universal knowledge reference books in a small reference section in the library. And that's okay. And there might, I mean, there are some reference books that literally do not fit into a specific subject category because they're about everything, okay? Nonfiction DVDs. So as far as interfiling these, you would label your DVDs with the same category, subcategory labels that you used for your nonfiction collection. I would recommend that it covers the DVD on the spine label as long as it's in your catalog where, you know, you can search by type of material, right? So you can limit by DVDs or limit by multimedia. So that's fine. As far as other DVDs, CDs, and Playaways in general, in traditional Dewey, right, they all get to their own space in the library, housed separately, filed by Dewey call number. In Dewey Hybrid, you're constantly asking yourself, how will this be used? So I would argue that audiobooks should remain in their own section because most people, I mean, I guess you could go to the nonfiction section and you're interested in a topic and you discover there's an audiobook there, but most people are really looking for audiobooks because they want to listen in that format. So having those all together should stay that way. I wouldn't interfile them. Now DVDs, this is in quotes, for fun. I mean, it's totally debatable. You know, what counts as for fun? And, you know, lots of documentaries aren't just for fun, or are for fun, they're not just for learning. So this is one of those use your judgment things about how do patrons use these materials. Do we want to leave them in a fun DVD category of like feature films that people come in to check out to watch at home for fun? Or do we want to interfile with the appropriate, you know, subject to whatever it's about? If it's about the weather, would we put it in the weather section? So same thing, it's going to follow the same formula. Now, biographies. This is a big shift of what we did. And this was something that actually drove me absolutely crazy when I was a librarian before we did this. I would have students come in all the time who would say, I need a biography. My teacher wants me to read a biography. I hate biographies. And I'd say, well, you know, who would you want to read about? What do you love? And they would say, athletes. I love sports. I'll read a biography about, you know, an athlete. And I would say, okay, so who? And they would say, well, I don't know. Can't I just look at the biographies of athletes? Or they'd say, can't I just look at the biographies of celebrities? And I would say, well, it doesn't really work that way. So do you like the last names that begin with G or last names that begin with L? It was ridiculous. Like, you can't browse. You have to browse by last name. So this is one of the first things I would change, if nothing else, is subdivide biographies by realm of influence. So it is going to remain filed alphabetically by subject's last name, but it's going to be in the category of what was their life work. So people in sports would have, in the sports section, there's a biography subsection. In the English category, there's a biography subcategory. Same thing with health. So every major category that you have is going to have a biography section. And this is one reason why the color coding labels, the label protectors, are so important, because there's a biography section for, say, 8 different sections, but they're color coded, so you're not going to mix them up. Okay, so this was like groundbreaking, shifting the biographies this way. So here's, for example, the sports, right? So all the sports biographies are green, but the English biographies were orange, so you wouldn't mix them up. So now it's time to physically move your books to new locations. You're going to need a lot of space for this probably. So you either need tables or carts. You definitely need coffee, probably some other things too. And you want to figure out where you're going to put your books before you start doing this. And this is a hard call, because you're looking at like different labels on the shelf and you're trying to figure out, well, how much space will the health section take up? I mean, it's pulling from this class of numbers from Dewey and this class of numbers, and you're trying to picture it in your head. Do your best to try to figure out where you're going, like what's going to fit where and how you want to design this. Something that I would mention though that's really important is making sure that you think about patron browsing behavior and where you would put sections. So for example, I would not put the health section like wide out in the open where all the comfy chairs are and everybody sits, because nobody really wants to browse for books on maybe personal health conditions right out with tons of people watching them. But maybe the sports books are totally on display. If you've got a wall of shelving that faces, a huge open space, maybe put them there, because that would really draw attention, and it's not something that people feel embarrassed about or private about. So thinking about how you go about those things is important for physical location of your categories in your library. So then the goal here is to you start at 0 essentially in the Dewey Decimal System, and you go through the stacks and you're going to start pulling by category. So say you're doing arts and music, and you're going to go through and pull every book that you have put an art and music label on. And then you're going to, organize them by, okay, I'm going to put all the art and music architecture books here, and then all the art and music art books here. And so they're going to start going in order, okay? So you're going to have them grouped by category and subcategory and physically moved on the shelf. So this is the only point at which it becomes a challenge, where if somebody searches the catalog and they find a call number, the call number is not going to match where the book is on the shelf. Up until this point, that hasn't been a problem. So this is kind of like the crunch time where it could become an issue. Not the end of the world though, because you can kind of figure it out because it's intuitive. But so I just want to, make that clear. So this is where you then go to the beginning of one of your new categories. So the beginning of health or the beginning of sports. And you start with, you go in their inventory style with your cart and laptop and scanner, scan the barcode of the first book, you pull up the record, and you start editing the way you decided you were going to edit. So you're going to edit the call number field, and you leave the Dewey number there, you type in front of it and add your prefix, and then you're possibly adding your sublocation drop-down menu if you've decided you're doing that. And the reason you move the books first and now you're changing the numbers in your OPAC is because those prefixes, you can now copy and paste them, and it's exponentially faster. So you're doing, all of the business, career, and education books with the subcategory of economics. You're going to do them all at once, and you're going to copy and paste everything I just said at the front of every call number field, instead of literally typing it, because if you make a mistake, then it doesn't sort correctly when you do an inventory and it creates problems. So copying and pasting is important. You could try batching it. I'm not sure, it depends on your OPAC if you have batching options, but look into it. But literally typing everything, there will be mistakes. So I would not recommend that. So we've made it to step 11 here. When you hit the color coding, it's a really good sign, because it means everything is on the shelf where it needs to be. The numbers have been changed in your OPAC, And now you are literally just going through and putting labels to cover all of the new call numbers. And we did it in a way where it didn't cover the original Dewey number, it just covered the new label. And it just made an easy dividing line for jumping down to see the number and jumping up to see the new category. So these are the ones we did in Dartmouth, you know, totally subject to whatever works for you. And then you're going to create new signage. So you look at what's literally on the shelf and you know, change your numbers and things like that. You're going to create a map directory floor plan so that when people walk in, it's kind of like walking into Macy's and it says, you are here. Here is this, here is this. And oh, second floor is here. And this has, you know, whatever category. So it makes it really easy to say, okay, well, I'm going to go over and check out the world culture section. And it's over in the far right corner of the library, whatever it is. So you're going to use your professional judgment in many ways here, but this was an example of using professional judgment of where to put something. So recently in upstate New York, we had books on the Shakers, right? And that, because of where we're located, that counts as local history. So I noticed that these were split across the 200s and the 900s. I think there actually might have been some in the 600s too, with like cooking. So that wasn't really helpful because nobody's really going to care about, you know, Shakers as a religion and Shakers as history in a high school library and need it to be in the religion section or need it to be in the history section. I have a feeling if you're researching the Shakers, you'd want everything. You'd want the cookbooks too. So we made the decision that we would put it, you know, local history and culture would be everything about the Shakers, no matter what aspect of their life it was about. So that's a judgment call, and totally up to whatever is important to your library and your patrons. So if you're not going to do the whole thing, if you're not ready for that, and if you don't think you're going to get approval, start small. So as I said, first thing I would do everywhere is genreify your biographies. You can also then interfile your nonfiction DVDs, especially if they're not circulating as much. You can interfile as many reference materials as possible. And then you can also consolidate your career books. This is another heavy hitter for me that drives me crazy. In traditional Dewey, careers are filed by Dewey, right? So books on becoming a computer programmer are in 005 because that's computer programming, programs, and data. This creates a huge browsing challenge because most people that want to read a career book are looking for a new career or looking for a career, and they're not sure which one they want. So they kind of want to look at lots of careers, or maybe, you know, look at all the topics and say, oh, I never thought I could become that. I wonder what I need to do to go into that career. So they're not going to walk through the whole library and pick one out from every different section because they don't even know what they don't know. That's the whole problem. So a career section is very important. You would want to pull all of your career books and put them together. Even if, you know, you don't do the whole Dewey hybrid thing, creating a career section the way we've already created a biography section can be so helpful for students and, you know, adult patrons to be able to see what's out there. So when we did the Dartmouth High School project, this was done in 2013, and it was myself and another TA as well. And our nonfiction collection was 13,000 books. So I don't want you to immediately jump to conclusions and say, oh my gosh, we're a public library system. We've got 125,000 books. And you think, you know, you did 13,000 books and you think it was so easy and we could just do this. I would argue that if you think about it, a public library and a school library use the same framework, right? They're both using Dewey. They both have the same like span of categories. And honestly, figuring out the categories is the hardest part, because once you've made a decision and you know which ones you're keeping and which ones, you know, you're using, then you're just labeling books. And I would say that yes, we had to figure out where we're going to put our cookbooks, right? And we created a food section. We didn't label it cookbooks, we labeled it food. And so making that decision was important and took time. And maybe we only have, I don't know, say 30 cookbooks, and maybe a public library has 500 cookbooks or 200 cookbooks or whatever it is. it's not nearly as much time as you would think, because you just label every one of them with the same label once you've created it. So yes, it is going to take more time to label more books, but you're going to do the same amount of upfront work no matter the size of your collection. So in this case, it took us 8 months from the initial idea when I read that magazine article, and then was like, oh, what a great idea. Let's do this. No big deal. And then it was, took 8 months. But we were also inventing the wheel as we went. There were so many like start, stop, choose a category, then realize that's not going to work. Take the labels off, 100 books. So 8 months wasn't really 8 months if we had had all this planning ahead of time. So here were some of the results we had. These are great things. Misplaced hot topic books. I had heard about this happening as a result of going like Dewey-Free, and I wasn't really sure what it meant until I started to see it happening. It would be things like gay marriage or homosexuality, the same topic, right? Where teenagers are really interested in that and want to research it and want to learn more about it, but they feel really, embarrassed about it among their peers for some reason, and they don't want to, just grab a book off the shelf and walk up and check it out because they're too self-conscious about that. Same thing with, say, teen pregnancy or even maybe cancer. If their parent got diagnosed with cancer, they don't want things to be public. So what we would find is they would take the books to the back corner, which happened to be social studies, and they would apparently read them and then leave them like on top of the shelf, on top of a row of books, not checked out. And it was from, way across the library. And this happened consistently enough that we were realizing the difference is that kids are finding what they're looking for. They're finding the books about teen pregnancy, and they're getting the information they need, even though they're not checking it out. And that was huge. So we knew it was making a big difference. We were also getting positive anecdotal comments. Like I said, we didn't do an initial survey, so we didn't have post-survey results to truly measure that. But we got a lot of really great feedback about how easy it was to use. Student browsing behavior. I had kids who would, I had this student, I'll never forget this, came up to the desk with a book on the Cold War, which is way in the back in the social studies section, way on the bottom in this small section that, you'd never really would find otherwise, and came up with it. And I said, did you find what you're looking for? Is this what you needed? Do you need help with anything? And he said, oh yeah, I've got a project on the Cold War. So I just, went and read the thing and found it. And he found exactly what he needed without even having to ask me. And it was mind blowing. And I realized this was happening in so many ways that I wasn't even hearing about, It was also easier for us as staff. You take 3 steps and you realize you can keep going because you'll figure it out. You can figure out where the books are that you need. You don't have to look up the call number anymore. It also helped us discover holes in our collection. So we went through sports and we had made labels for, every major sport, right? So we had a label for tennis, but we literally had no tennis books. There were no tennis books. So suddenly we were saying, oh my gosh, I guess we need to order tennis books. And this happened in many types of situations where you'd realize you got 3 books on a topic and you should have more. So we found really interesting holes in the collection that we were able to fix and fill. And I think one of the greatest things about it is I left Massachusetts, let's see, I think it's been 4 years now, and came back to New York where I'm from. And the Dewey hybrid system is still being used in the high school where we designed it. And I know that in some school libraries especially, they switch to a Dewey-Free system, and then a new librarian comes in and they say, I'm not dealing with this, and they switch it all back. And I've seen that happen. And I think there's been at least 2 librarians since I've been gone, and they've still kept the system because it's been such a success. So that's really exciting. So I just want to say thank you so much, and I'm absolutely available for questions via email, or if you're really considering doing something like this and you want to share, this is what my library is all about. This is, these are the constraints we have. These are the challenges we have. I don't know how to handle this piece, or maybe you didn't address that piece. Feel free to email me. I would absolutely love to help. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Haley. This concludes the NILA 2020 On-Demand program, Classify Nonfiction with the Dewey Hybrid Model. We hope you continue to take advantage of all the on-demand and live programs the NILA 2020 annual virtual conference has to offer. Thank you for helping us make this the best virtual conference ever.